I knew something was off the second Nolan called Colin basement furniture during the team sync, said it with a grin, like it was some harmless little joke, while everyone else awkward laughed into their coffee mugs. Colin didn't flinch, just clicked through the ticketing dashboard like always, eyes scanning a wall of error logs none of us dared touch. I'd been at Centralogix 8 years, long enough to know what kept the company's lungs pumping wasn't Nolan's spreadsheets or his color-coded performance decks. It was Colin Merritt, the man with the old ThinkPad, 3 thermoses, and a voice so quiet you'd miss it if the HVAC was running. Colin wasn't flashy. He didn't pitch ideas, didn't schmooze at the company parties, didn't even use Slack emojis. But when something broke, when the client data sync failed at 3 a.m. or our login API ghosted an entire continent, Colin was the one you called. And he always fixed it, silently, completely. He'd grown into the servers like ivy. Tangled, reliable, essential in ways no one from upstairs ever wanted to understand. So when Nolan Graves, all gelled hair, cuffed trousers, and an MBA that cost more than my mortgage, strutted into the company like he was Moses parting Red Sea spreadsheets, I knew it was only a matter of time before something important snapped. He started small. Consolidate the infra spend. Reduce human error through automation. Migrate to cloud-native systems. Sounded smart in meetings, looked sexy on investor slides. But the devil, as Colin used to mumble over his keyboard, lives in dependencies, and dependencies don't show up on pie charts. Before we go deeper, just a quick thing. If you're hooked already, please take a second to subscribe and like the video. It helps more than you know and lets us keep telling stories like this. Now, back to it. Nolan called it operational streamlining. What it really meant was gutting the very people who understood why the system hadn't caught fire in over a decade. He cut Colin's overtime budget, slashed 2 of his junior sysadmins, replaced them with contractors from a firm that spelled redundancy wrong in their proposal, told us we'd be agile now, said we were going to be data-driven, which was rich considering the data lived in systems none of his golden boys had ever even logged into. Colin took it in stride. No rants, no emails, just started showing up a little earlier, staying a little later. I passed by his desk once at midnight. He had 2 monitors going, a third open to what looked like some kind of shell script, looping with a countdown timer. When I asked what he was working on, he just said, "Cleaning up dependencies." I didn't press. You don't press when the guy who's been your company's silent oxygen supply says something cryptic at midnight. Thing is, nobody ever really knew what Colin did because things never failed long enough to ask. Even the CTO used to joke that Colin could disappear for a week and nobody'd notice, until the backup log started crying. Nolan latched onto that joke like it was prophecy. "No offense," he told Colin during one check-in, "but you're kind of invisible." Colin blinked, tilted his head like he was studying a bug. "Good systems are," he said. It was like watching someone mock the brakes on a speeding train. I watched Nolan stroll through the server room once on a tour, scoffing at the cables like they were personal insults. "This all needs to go," he told the contractor beside him. "Obsolete spaghetti, we'll route it all to the cloud and script the rest. Who even needs local control anymore?" Colin, 2 feet away under a patch panel, didn't say a word, but I saw him reach behind the rack, trace a cable with one hand like it was a pulse. Within 3 weeks, Nolan had a new title, Senior Director. Bigger office, more dashboards, and a new mantra, visibility. Visibility of processes, visibility of talent, visibility of metrics. Only one problem, he never saw the guy whose fingerprints were on every functional system. He tried to drag Colin into the light, assigned him to a transition initiative, asked him to document legacy architecture for knowledge continuity. But we all knew what it was. Nolan wanted to extract whatever was in Colin's head, dump it into a Google sheet, and let the contractors optimize. Colin nodded through it, took the notes, drew the diagrams. But behind the diagrams, he started unplugging the automation scripts. One by one, nobody noticed, because the lights were still on. But I saw the change, in the way Colin cleaned his desk drawer, in how he printed things, in how he stopped using the centralized backup system and went back to old encrypted thumb drives, rotated weekly. I asked him once why. He said, "If the lights go out, someone's got to know how to find the fuse box." Nolan didn't know there was a fuse box, but Colin did, and by the time anyone upstairs realized it, he'd already flipped half the switches. It started with a spreadsheet titled Optimization Roadmap. It showed up in our inboxes at 6:04 a.m. sharp, color-coded like a kindergarten lesson plan. Every line item was a dagger, sheathed in buzzwords. Decommission legacy protocols, Q2. Consolidate server touchpoints, Q3. Retire deprecated personnel processes, ASAP. Deprecated personnel. That's what Colin had become to Nolan, an expired function in a clean UI. At the next ops meeting, Nolan stood at the front of the room with that same smug glint he always wore when explaining things to people who actually did the work. "We've identified areas of excessive manual involvement," he said, clicking to a chart labeled Preventative Overhead. Under it, a list of Colin's weekly maintenance routines. "These cycles are eating resources with no measurable return." Colin didn't flinch. He just took a sip from his dented thermos and stared at the screen like it was a slow car crash. Nolan went on. "From now on, we'll be leaning into automation-first workflows. Predictive monitoring, not reactive legacy babysitting. The consultants will help us map the transition." The consultants arrived the next day. 2 of them. Young, loud. One wore a Patagonia vest indoors and kept asking where our pipeline orchestration dashboards were. The other said she couldn't believe we still used on-prem servers. Colin showed them the topology map. They squinted like it was written in Latin. "You guys don't use Terraform?" Patagonia vest asked. "We use what works," Colin said flatly, before turning back to his terminal. HR called him in later that week. "We'd love your help onboarding the transition team," they chirped, like they were offering him cake. "It's a chance to future-proof your knowledge. Think of it as mentorship." He said nothing, just nodded once and left. That night, he stayed late again. I passed his cube on my way out and saw something new. A binder. Actual, physical binder, labeled Fail-Over Decoupling, CM. I asked him if he was okay. He looked up and said, "They're not future-proofing the system. They're ego-proofing it." Nolan kept pushing. The firewall Colin had maintained by hand for years, slated for replacement with a cloud-managed one, despite the fact that the current one had never let a breach through. The automated backup Colin had personally scripted, tested, and patched every other month. Disconnected in favor of a plug-and-play solution that sent our data through 3 third-party services, all with different compliance guarantees. Colin requested a phased transition, documented the risks, sent detailed handoffs. Nolan forwarded the doc to the consultants with a single note. "Let's simplify this." Colin began printing. Not just the infrastructure logs, root access logs, uptime comparisons, patch history, firmware update reports, all the things the new team would never even know to ask for. He printed with timestamps, footers, even version hashes. He kept them in a fireproof lockbox under his desk. "You paranoid?" I asked him once, trying to lighten the mood. "No," he said, flipping through a script. "I just don't trust people who think risk looks good in a pie chart." By midweek, the contractors were boasting they'd be migrating core ops to the cloud within 6 weeks. Nolan was thrilled, told the board we'd cut legacy costs by 37%. He started hinting about a VP title in Slack. Then came the access removals. Slowly at first, then fast. Colin was removed from the AWS billing account, then the internal repo, then the core monitoring interface. Streamlining roles, they called it. He didn't say a word, just quietly started logging every tool he no longer had access to, and what systems they were linked to. For each one, he ran a script. They didn't know it, but every automation they thought they were inheriting was now quietly severed from the heartbeat triggers Colin had built. To them, it still looked live, but it wasn't. Everything that worked, the silent things, the unnoticed dependencies, were running on Grace. Colin was disconnecting Grace, one line at a time. The email landed in his inbox at 8:01 a.m., subject line, "Organizational realignment, mandatory attendance." Sent by HR, CC'd to over 200 employees, no context, no agenda, just a Zoom link, a time, and that suffocating corporate tone that tries to sound like an invitation while holding a loaded gun behind its back. Colin stared at it for a moment, didn't blink, didn't click, just minimized the window and calmly returned to the shell script he'd been tuning since dawn. Something about a watchdog routine that, to anyone else, would look like a boring cron job, but I knew better. I was 3 rows behind him, pretending to work, but mostly watching the quiet precision of a man sharpening a blade everyone else had forgotten existed. The office was unusually loud that morning. Nolan's contractors were on site for a vision sync, which meant they were whiteboarding buzzwords and slapping each other's backs while someone tried to figure out why our CRM had dropped 4 leads overnight. Colin, as always, didn't look up. I passed his desk around 8:22. He was typing something into terminal. Fast, methodical keystrokes. I caught a glimpse of the screen. A script labeled wash init exit sequence.sh. Morning, I offered, trying not to sound like I was watching the end of the world take shape. He nodded once, reached into his drawer, pulled out a thin sheet of paper, folded it neatly, twice, slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. That coat was older than most interns. Canvas, worn elbows, always smelled faintly of server dust and black coffee. "What's in the envelope?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "Instructions," he said quietly, for someone who might actually read them. At 9:01, he pushed back from his desk, saved the last config file, then did something I hadn't seen him do in years. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a Wobie stick, wrapped in gaffer tape, labeled in his handwriting, failover keys 0xF1. He plugged it in, ran a second script. This one was simpler. No loops, no redundancy checks, just one line. I decouple and shut down monitor, then he waited. At 9:12, HR pinged the floor. "Everyone, let's move to the lounge for the meeting. Coffee and pastries provided." That fake friendly chirp in their voice made my stomach turn. Colin stood, smoothed out the wrinkles on his coat, grabbed his badge, still clipped to his pocket, still that same faded photo of him taken in 2012. We all filed into the lounge. Colin didn't speak, didn't look nervous. Just stood near the back, hands folded in front of him, like a man attending his own execution, and making peace with it. Nolan strutted in 5 minutes late, of course. Wearing his Q4 efficiency jacket, sleeves rolled, that Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a heart monitor for his ego. He clapped his hands. "All right, team. Today's about clarity, realignment, moving forward." Everyone already knew. Even the ones pretending to check email knew. The whole room had that sterile hospital energy. Everyone acting normal around something that wasn't. "Let's not drag it out," Nolan smiled. "Colin Merritt, our legacy infrastructure lead, will be transitioning out as of today. 11 solid years, and we thank him. Please join me in wishing him well." Scattered claps, the kind that happen when nobody wants to be the first to stop. Colin stepped forward, pulled his badge from his pocket, and handed it to Nolan. And then, I swear, it was like time folded in on itself. He tilted his head just slightly and said, "Then you'd better be ready to explain to the investors why the servers go offline in 9 minutes. Just like that, no emotion, no tremor in his voice, just a statement. The room stilled. Nolan blinked, opened his mouth, closed it, tried to laugh. "Is that some kind of joke?" Colin didn't answer. He just turned, walked past us all, and out the glass doors. No goodbyes, no box of things, no backward glance, just the faint ticking of a silent countdown that none of them even realized had already begun. "Today marks the beginning of what I like to call our new era of digital clarity," Nolan said, puffing his chest like a Dollar Tree Caesar. "Gone are the days of undocumented workflows, opaque server maintenance, and legacy dependencies we can't even quantify. We are, as of this morning, a modern company." Applause. From the board interns, the bootlickers, the consultants in Patagonia vests. The rest of us, the ones who'd ever stayed past midnight or watched Colin resurrect a dead system using a patch file and caffeine fumes, we just sat there. Nolan loved a performance. He was built for bright rooms and buzzwords. He stood under the fluorescent lights like they were spotlights, pacing with a wireless clicker in his hand and a smug little smirk growing by the second. "Some of you may be surprised," he continued, "but I believe change must be public, transparent, and decisive, which is why we're announcing this realignment with gratitude and a firm eye on the future." He clicked to a slide labeled "Transitioning Key Personnel." Colin's name was dead center. No photo, just his name. Colin Merritt. The man who kept the company breathing for 11 years was reduced to bullet point fodder on a canvas slide. Nolan gestured theatrically toward the back. "Colin, if you'd join us." And Colin did. He didn't rush, didn't look embarrassed, just stepped forward, slow and sure, like a man crossing a quiet bridge he'd already burned. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his badge. Held it for a moment, then passed it to Nolan like he was handing over a severed power cable. The badge dangled in Nolan's fingers. That's when it happened. Colin tilted his head, looked Nolan dead in the eye, and said, with the calm of a surgeon, "Then you'd better be ready to explain to the investors why the servers go offline in 9 minutes." The silence was instant and brutal, like someone had killed the power right then and there. You could have heard a Slack notification across the building. Nolan blinked, laughed once, short, nervous, a sound that died in his throat. "Is that some kind of joke?" Colin said nothing. He just turned, walked past us all, and out the glass doors like it was any other Tuesday. That was the moment something in the room shifted. It wasn't the words exactly. It was the certainty behind them. Like he hadn't come up with that line on the spot. Like it was written into the script, and we were the only ones who didn't know the next scene. Nolan tried to save face. "Okay, folks, let's keep moving. Anyone with infrastructure concerns can reach out to the transition team." He clicked to the next slide. Nobody was looking. I watched the CTO lean forward and whisper something to one of the consultants. I watched the consultants go pale. I watched 3 engineers suddenly remember every undocumented routine Colin had ever mentioned in passing. And I watched the server room monitor, the one we never used anymore because Nolan had insisted on dashboard-only visibility, start flickering through error states like a countdown to confession. Nolan didn't know it yet, but the show he'd just staged, that wasn't a farewell. It was the fuse. The first failure came 60 seconds after Colin's boots hit the parking lot. It started as a blip on the finance dashboard, just one red tile blinking in a sea of green, then 2, then 5. Within 60 more seconds, the revenue flow tracker went completely dark. "We lost the billing relay," someone muttered across the room. Nolan glanced up from his phone and waved a dismissive hand. "It'll auto-recover. They always do." Except this time, it didn't. By the 3rd minute, the CRM's heartbeat flatlined. Every single sales rep's screen showed the same looping error. Unable to load client data. "Please contact your administrator." The same administrator who now sat in traffic, sipping gas station coffee while the company he once held together with spit and legacy code started bleeding out in real time. Nolan barked, "Restart the container cluster. Reboot the sync daemon. Whatever it takes." The lead contractor stared at his terminal like it was written in Greek. "We don't have access to the relay's root shell," he stammered. "We were told the cloud handoff was complete." "It was," Nolan snapped. "It wasn't," came a voice from the infrastructure lead. "Colin never signed off, said the dependencies weren't mapped yet." That's when Nolan's voice cracked. "What do you mean dependencies?" 6 minutes. The backup manager, normally a silent app churning through logs in the background, started screaming. Literally. The alert noise had been set to a klaxon Colin once jokingly called the last sound before litigation. Mid-cycle halts. File locks, redundant syncs stuck in eternal loops. "You said you verified the new backup schema," Nolan shouted. The consultant looked like he wanted to die. "We assumed the scripts were automated. They weren't running through any containerized jobs. There's no version control." Because Colin didn't need version control. He was version control. 7 minutes. The comms team tried to send out an all-hands update through our internal platform. The message went unsent. Then the whole app crashed. Server timeout, authentication failure. "I can't even ping the messaging service," IT whispered. "It's like it doesn't exist anymore." 8 minutes. The legal team burst into the room asking why client data flags were triggering breach warnings. Marketing was trying to prep tweets before the outage hit Twitter. Dev was swearing because Jira had just dumped all its tickets into 404 hell, and Nolan, sweet, spreadsheet-obsessed Nolan, was now drenched in the kind of sweat they don't teach you to manage in MBA programs. "I want a full system schema on my desk now," he screamed. "Where are the architecture maps? The root chain? Anything!" Nobody answered. Because there was only one copy of the compiled system schema. It wasn't digital, it wasn't in the cloud, it wasn't in the company wiki. It was printed, folded neatly, and sitting in the inside pocket of a canvas coat currently heading northbound on I-77 with the radio off. At exactly 9 minutes, the last domino fell. The internal messaging tool, the one Nolan's beloved dashboards depended on for real-time sync, went dead. No alerts, no status, just blank screens and an entire floor full of people turning to each other like survivors in the first hour of a zombie movie. Then the CTO whispered what no one wanted to hear. "We don't know where anything lives." Colin did, but Colin was gone. By 10:37 a.m., Nolan's bravado had vanished so thoroughly you'd think it never existed. The man who once called Colin a glorified janitor with root access now stood in the middle of the war room, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, eyes bloodshot, barking into a phone like volume could substitute for competence. "Just fix it!" he screamed at the consultants on speaker. "Spin up a backup environment. Rehydrate the stack from cloud storage." A long, nervous pause. One consultant cleared her throat. "Sir, there is no cloud storage. The transition was never finalized." Nolan blinked. "Then where the hell is the data?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because everyone in that room already knew it was wherever Colin had left it. The CTO, who'd been pacing like a man waiting for his own funeral, finally cracked. He pulled out his phone, opened his personal contacts, and hit the name at the top, Colin Merritt. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again. Then tried texting. Nothing. "Should I call from my number?" one of the board assistants whispered. "Don't bother," the CTO muttered, wiping his face. "He's not ghosting us, he's just watching." And he was. Colin was sitting at a diner booth on the east side of town. Same table he always used. One black coffee, one notebook, no phone on the table. The coat was hanging beside him like a silent witness. The folded sheet, the one with the system schema, login fallbacks, and what I later learned was a full list of buried kill switches, sat beside the mug. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Back at HQ, the logs had turned apocalyptic. Memory leaks, script loops, redundant processes chasing their tails until they choked. We'd spent years letting Colin stitch duct tape around a tangled beast, and now the beast was bleeding out in front of Nolan's slides. By noon, client calls were being escalated to legal. One of our oldest contracts, a financial analytics firm with strict SLA penalties, flagged us for breach. Their team had hard-coded dependencies into a now-defunct microservice Colin built 3 years ago. Nobody even knew it was a dependency until the whole platform tipped over like a drunk on black ice. Investor inboxes lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Nolan's dashboard, the same one he'd once bragged could predict failure before it happened, had gone fully black. Every data stream routed through Colin's architecture had collapsed. There were no redundancies, because Colin was the redundancy. Someone on the board finally said it out loud. "We're not going to fix this without him." That's when the shift happened. Not loudly, not in a board vote or some dramatic public reversal. No, it happened on LinkedIn. First came a message from one of the quieter board members, a man named Ellis, gray hair, always observing, rarely speaking. "Colin, I believe there's been some short-sightedness. Would you be open to a conversation?" Colin read it, didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another message, this one from the audit chair. "You have leverage, we understand that now. What would it take to discuss terms?" Still nothing. Then came the third message, from the founder himself, the man who'd once called Colin the only person who makes this place feel like it still breathes. "Please." That was the one Colin answered. His reply? "I'll meet, but only off-site. No further detail, no anger, no gloating, just calm, quiet control. The kind of message that doesn't ask for power, because it already owns it." And just like that, the balance shifted. The man they fired in front of the company, he now held the pulse of every system they didn't even know they relied on. And Nolan, he was rootless. The meeting was held in the back room of a co-working space in Akron. No logo, no press, no minutes. Just 3 board members in tailored wool coats and 1 man in canvas, sipping bad coffee like he had all the time in the world. Colin didn't rush. He let the silence stretch until even the founder, who once bragged he could negotiate an IPO during a root canal, started fidgeting with the corner of his sleeve. "Let me guess," Colin said finally, setting his mug down without looking up. "You're not here because of a technical question. You're here because the ship's halfway underwater and none of your lifeboats are patched." The audit chair leaned forward, elbows on the reclaimed wood table. "We were told the systems were cloud migrated." "They were labeled that way," Colin corrected. "Visually mapped, presentation deep. But the core services, billing triggers, access validation, comms redundancy, internal patch scripting, vendor escalations, they're still tied to local servers, most of which were never decoupled from my schema." Ellis, the gray-haired one, cleared his throat. "So you're saying everything we've done since Nolan's promotion was a facade?" Colin finally looked up. No, I'm saying it was a skin, a UI without bones. If you'd given it another month, a sneeze would have brought it down. I just saved you the suspense. The founder exhaled slowly, leaning back. What would it take to bring it back online? Colin didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat, the same coat that had followed him through server rooms, 3 a.m. hotfixes, and over a decade of silent loyalty, and pulled out the folded paper. He slid it across the table. 3 lines. Typed. No letterhead, no drama, Nolan is removed immediately, no reassignment, no severance beyond minimums. Colin Merritt selects and leads his own infrastructure team. No consultants, no board veto, all system decisions routed through a direct channel between Colin Merritt and the board. No managerial intermediaries, no mention of money, no title demands, just architecture. The kind of architecture that doesn't just support a company, it remembers it. Every patch, every undocumented failover, every silent restart that kept the platform breathing when everyone else was asleep. They didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. Colin had walked them through hell without a single raise your voice moment. Now he was offering a map out, and they were smart enough to take it. The founder nodded once. Done, Ellis added. And Nolan? He's already gone, said the audit chair. Legal sent the papers this morning. He tried to blame it on the contractors. We showed him the logs. Colin didn't smile, just nodded and stood, slow and deliberate, like the storm had passed and the rebuilding could begin. He left the paper behind, didn't need it anymore. That evening, while the company was still licking its wounds and trying to reset passwords they no longer controlled, an internal message was sent to a select list of employees. Subject: Reinstatement Infrastructure Ops from Board Executive Oversight Content. Effective immediately, Colin Merritt will resume operational oversight of all core systems. Do not attempt rollback without his written consent. No apology, no explanation. But everyone understood what it meant. The server whisperer was back, and this time he wasn't answering to anyone but the top. The glass doors slid open like they always had, but this time no badge beeped. Colin didn't need one. He was flanked by Ellis, who didn't speak as they crossed the lobby, just offered a nod to the receptionist, who looked like she was trying to disappear behind her monitor. Half the office froze when they saw Colin. A few stood. One guy, Zach, from DevOps, actually applauded before realizing no one else had joined in. There was no dramatic entrance music, no speech, just the soft thud of worn boots on polished tile and the whisper of reputations imploding in real time. Nolan was already gone. Security had walked him out the back door 30 minutes earlier. The last thing he said, according to Brenda in finance, was, "This is political theater." The IT team found his dashboards locked in infinite load. His custom metrics pipeline had eaten itself trying to pull uptime from a ghost network. The era of dashboard worship ended the second the lights flickered, and no one knew why. Colin walked past Nolan's empty office without a glance, past the posters that said things like "Data is truth" and "Automate to elevate." Past the corner whiteboard still filled with acronyms nobody had dared erase yet. He made his way to the old server room. Key code still the same. No one had dared change it. Inside, everything smelled the same. Plastic, dust, coffee from somewhere that time forgot. The kind of smell that told you someone had been keeping the heart beating while the brain upstairs played PowerPoint. Colin pulled a drive from his coat. External, rugged, labeled in his scratchy pen. Primary rebuild, handshake 1. He plugged it into the legacy terminal that Nolan had called an embarrassing relic in his second week. The cursor blinked like it had been waiting. Colin typed one line, "Init, reclaim silence." Then, slowly, the screen came alive. Lines of green text danced down like rain on a windshield. Dependencies relinked, scripts reconnected. Dormant tasks flicked back on like lights in a long-abandoned house. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was real. And more importantly, it worked. 2 hours later, the first batch of systems stabilized. Finance restored. CRM, partially functional but recoverable. Com platform, rebooted on local sync. Backups, slow but crawling back to life. The big clients had been notified. Legal had prepped the statements. Internally, someone posted in Slack, "Colin's back. We're gonna make it." That got reposted 17 times in the next 10 minutes. By mid-afternoon, the old team, what was left of it, had gathered. No one needed to be told what to do. They just got to work. It felt like muscle memory, like stepping into an old pickup and knowing exactly where the clutch catches. Colin didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He just walked the floor once. Quiet, measured. Engineers lifted their heads, nodded, and returned to their terminals like soldiers seeing their old captain return after a long, stupid war. Someone offered him Nolan's old office. He declined, said he didn't need a corner view to rebuild the backbone. Instead, he claimed a workbench in the server room, set up 2 monitors, 1 notebook, same dented thermos. He opened a text file labeled System Notes, Reintegration, typed 3 words, Begin Again, thoughtfully. Then he opened a private terminal, started drafting a new schema from scratch. Not everything had survived. Some logs were gone. A few vendor SLAs would take hits. But the bones were still there, and the hands that built them were back. Colin didn't gloat, didn't strut. But everyone in that building understood one thing. You can fake dashboards, you can fake metrics, you can even fake competence, but you can't fake roots. And Colin Merritt had never left the soil. 3 weeks later, the air in the office felt different. Not louder, not busier, just steadier, like the hum of a machine finally running in tune again. A memo hit inboxes just before lunch. No flourish, no PR polish, just a header and a decision. Legacy Systems Transition Strategy, under Colin Merritt. Effective immediately, no interim review, no board oversight beyond quarterly syncs. By the end of the day, 3 clients who'd paused contracts during the outage had reinstated them. Another emailed personally to say, "We trust whoever's wearing the canvas coat." The finance team stopped whispering about breach clauses. Legal stopped preparing contingency language for vendor failures. The office, once addicted to dashboards and dead-eyed automation, had started listening again. To the engineers, to the architecture, to the people who built instead of presented. And Colin? He didn't say much about the change. His new office was 2 floors up, window-facing, tucked into the southwest corner of the building. Not flashy, but quiet. The kind of space where a man could think without being interrupted by anyone asking for a heat map. On the wall behind his desk hung a single frame. Inside it, the ID badge Nolan had yanked from his hand in front of the entire company. Below it, a brass plaque engraved with the words, "You're done here." It was the only decoration in the room. No degrees, no accolades, just a memory, fossilized, framed, and flipped. I stopped by once to drop off some log notes. One of the junior engineers was already there, barely out of college, with that eager energy of someone who still thought code alone could save a company. She looked at Colin with this wide-eyed curiosity and asked, "Did you ever worry, that it would all just crash, that you'd pull the plug and they'd let it burn instead of calling you back?" Colin didn't look up right away, just finished typing something. Probably another unlogged patch that would keep us alive another decade. Then he leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and said, "Only for them." The junior blinked. "You mean?" He smiled, the faintest trace of it, that smile that never reached his eyes but always meant he saw 10 moves ahead. "They built dashboards," he said. "I built the thing under the dashboards." No one replied. No one needed to. Outside his window, the city buzzed. Cars, cables, chaos. All of it depending in some way or another on a dozen invisible systems no investor pitch had ever honored. But they were running. Because Colin Merritt was back. Not louder, not prouder, just undeniable. And somewhere in a box, probably buried under his backup drives, was a second version of that framed badge. The one he almost threw away. The one that used to mean he belonged. Now, he didn't need permission to exist. They needed permission to run.